薄いのアホ。
プリズムパワーメイクアップカードレディー。
Welcome to Shojo Tell, where we discuss shoujo manga and tell who's hot and who's not, talk about themes, and just generally geek out. Today, November 8th, 2023, we'll be shoujo telling about the series The POE CLAN by Moto Hagio. I'm your host, Ashley McDonald, and I'm joined by Vrai Kaiser.
Hello.
And Megan DeYarman.
Hello.
Hello. All right. You've both been on this podcast before, but
We have. I wasn't sure if there was a no double dipping rule. I was hyped though. You said
no.
vampires.
Oh goodness, not. This is like my fourth time here.
Yeah, I was like, I love going back to the pool of people. Like, I want to expand the pool, right? But I'm always like, but it's so much easier with the people I already have a rapport with.
But last time I was on here, I said, you know what people should read more of is Yun Koga. So,
so I should have deleted you from here.
I love her. She's a mess.
Noted. All right. Well, for people who didn't listen to any of those episodes, though, Vrai, who are you?
Hey, I am Vrai Kaiser, they, them. I am a managing content editor at Anime Feminist. I also freelance when I'm not, like, just debilitatingly burned out. But you can find me on the internet on Blue Sky, Writer Vrai. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I love, my bio most places says I am professionally sad about vampires, and that's true. Oh, I guess it might. I think it might be published by the time this comes out. So I will say, on that topic, I just co-wrote a chapter with my partner, who is a gothic-focused academic, about trans vampires for the Palgrave Handbook of the Vampire, and it's a publicly accessible reference work, so people can find that.
Wow,
nice. Oh, you're very fancy, Megan. How are you gonna follow it up?
Well, with my usual spiel, I'm Megan. I'm a longtime manga reviewer, casual anime historian, panelist, occasional anime feminist contributor, and happy to be back here talking about one of my favorite subjects, old shoujo manga.
Love old shoujo.
Love old shoujo. All right, so yes, so we're here today to talk about some old shoujo, the best shoujo.
I mean, I always sound like just a snob when I say that, but I do find myself drawn to pre-1990 shoujo a lot. I really like the art style. I like how clean the lines are. I think a lot of people see the big, like the lot of negative space in the paneling, and sort of the cleanness of a lot of the lines, and the relative, I guess, simplicity or cartoonishness of the body shapes, and think it's like, well, the art's less polished back then, but old shoujo art is so pretty. Like, maybe some of the panel layout can be a little bit straightforward at times, but I just love how big the feelings are. And maybe it's the fact that it's several decades old means that when shoujo does that thing that I both love and frustrates me about it, where it's willing to dig its hands into the messiness of issues of, like, gender and identity and trauma and all of that. And sometimes it screws that up. But if it's old enough, I can look at it kind of academically, and it doesn't bother me.
I agree on a lot of that part. I mean, there's a certain mystique, a certain mystery, because we get so little pre-1990 shoujo over here. So, any bit of it we get is precious. Mm-hmm. But yes, I am also very much into it for the art, particularly in the case of the artist we're talking about today, Moto Hagio, because her career is so long and her art has evolved so much. And this one in particular, I'm going to get a lot more into depth on it later, is so pivotal to her career as a whole.
Yeah. I feel like the whole 1980s shoujo, like, I just, like, know very little. Like, I feel like it's, like, old shoujo is 70s, and then there's, like, 1990s and beyond, and then, like, 80s just disappeared. That's good.
That's the thing. There was plenty of mainstream hits in Japan. It's just a lot of that stuff isn't talked about academically in the way 1970s shoujo is. Like, there's a lot of books and articles and whatnot you can read about Moto Hagio and her contemporaries, not so much for people, talking about like Yumiko Igarashi or like Tokimeki Tonight or things like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Every month I look at manga surveys and say, please, somebody license Sword of Paros, and they don't.
We all have our one thing that we put into the manga surveys every month, right? All right. Well, we're going to start with a spoiler-free discussion of this almost 50-year-old manga.
Indeed.
Yes.
Although, in fairness, we did just get the full thing in English like 6 months ago.
It was a little later than that because I got the last book for Christmas last year. So
Yeah.
Time
I
is
think
fake.
it's been almost a year, but time is fake. You're right. So, Fry, can you give us a plot synopsis or some what should people know about the POE clan that will hook them into wanting to read it?
So, the POE Clan is a series of 2 collected volumes of stories published from 1975 to 1976. They are non-chronological, almost anthology-like, about a small clan of vampires known as the POE Clan, primarily focusing on Edgar Twilight. Now I'm so doubting myself again.
No, I don't think they ever give their original last name. It's just Edgar and Marybelle.
Right, I think you're right.
And their adopted parents have the last name of Portnell.
Yes, that's right. All right, so these 2 vampires, Edgar and his younger sister Marybelle, who were turned as adolescents, and so they travel around with 2 older vampires posing as their parents, and they call themselves the Portnell family, and they have to move regularly lest people catch on to the fact that they're vampires and set upon them with torches and pitchforks and crosses and silver bullets. So a lot of the, as one does. Yeah. So a lot of the stories are sort of these vignettes about a person who relates their experience having interactions where their lives were touched by these mysterious vampires and the relationships they formed and how these people disappeared and how it set sort of the course of their lives spinning off in some unexpected direction. It's very gothic and quiet. Some of the stories are happy. Some of them are melancholy. The main storyline that ties these individual narratives together is the fact that Marybelle has always been sickly and Edgar has always defined himself by needing to look after her. But at one point he finds another young man named Alan, who is sort of a haughty child of privilege who's sort of a sad little lonely rich kid on the inside. And they form this connection as sort of these only other people who are alone in the world. And so Alan and Edgar's relationship then becomes a point of fascination or a point of interaction for stories moving forward from a central locus point. And we learn about a central tragedy that becomes unpacked over time as the story unfolds. And if you're into non-chronological stories, if you're into gothic fiction, if you're into stories that are tragedies but have sort of an implicit hopefulness to them, I think that there's a really beautiful light touch to Hagio's storytelling here that's even a little more delicate than what she was doing with, say, Heart of Thomas or even some of her Otherworld Barbara stories. I think it's a very delicate work I keep coming back to, and I like it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to our paneling discussion before, it's the layout of these kinds of older shoujo are simpler, but it's so dense. The story is so dense. There's so many characters. So much is happening through 20 pages that more happens in 20 pages in this manga than a whole volume of modern manga.
And the symbolism is so dense. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, there's also, you don't really necessarily need to keep exhaustive tabs on it, but there is also something going on as you go along that's where did Edgar and Marybelle come from? Who were their birth parents? And sort of who are their descendants that they may or may not be interacting with as the centuries go on.
Yeah. And you mentioned how big these books are. I gotta say that I'm very small. I have very tiny hands. I'm this is so hard to read. It's just so big. This is a minor complaint.
They're beautiful releases, right? And I am so frustrated by Fantagraphics' whole thing. Like, I understand why doing the prestige model with Hagio's work, just because of how disrespected shoujo still is in the American market, was the way to go. I've heard that, it was tough times when Claudine was licensed by Seven Seas, for example. So it makes sense to do high price point, and look, we did it in hardcover, and we preserved all the color pages, but also we do really small runs and they're very expensive, and we don't make digital copies because we don't really feel like it. And it makes it so prohibitive. How are people supposed to discover that old shoujo is cool if it's only being marketed to a small group who's already aware of and wants it?
Yeah.
That's always the issue with older shoujo. In a lot of cases, there aren't digital files, whether it's by author request. A lot of them tend to be a little more paranoid about piracy, or just, digital scans don't necessarily exist. And the fact that Fantagraphics tends to focus more on targeting independent bookstores versus like your large chains, your Barnes and Noble, your Books A Million, and whatnot. And that's a noble thought, and it works fine for the sort of indie comics that they generally specialize in. But it does make it a lot harder for people to find this, access this in an affordable manner. Although I also agree that the books that onto themselves are just beautiful, sturdy, well-built hardcovers, with, at least in the second one, with a lot of the original color artwork. I kind of wish there was a little more supplementary material, but considering this is probably their, third or fourth Hagio release, they probably figured anyone picking this up at this point has an idea of who she is and why she's important.
Well, and I think it was a little bit of a there were difficulties in that, these are dense volumes, and if I am correct, Rachel Thorne is sort of the exclusive translator for Hagio's works at this point, and I know she had a lot of troubles health and safety wise when COVID hit, and that pushed the second volume back somewhat. So it makes sense that you would just focus on getting the work out, especially when old shoujo, to my understanding, has a lot of it tends to use heightened language and like possibly archaic kanji type stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not to mention, she's still an academic. She's still a professor.
She also has an extensive day job and a young child.
Props to Rachel Thorne is what we're saying.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it just reminded me of, I think Heart of Thomas has that nice little essay in the back, doesn't it, that she wrote?
It does.
I believe so. Not to mention the extensive interview in A Drunken Dream, which did thankfully get reissued not too long ago.
Oh yeah, I got the second one. I still don't have Otherworld Barbara though, which pains me.
Yeah, I was like, which one did I have? But it was A Drunken Dream, where there's a long essay in it for sure.
Mm-hmm. And what kills me even more, I'm just going down this digression rabbit hole, is that with the Fantagraphics model, we're probably never going to get A Cruel God Reigns. I mean, it's already in the content warning rabbit hole where Sakura Gari and Kazutaki no Uda live, where we can't have these serious explorations of the trauma of sexual assault, even though they're like thoughtful and stuff. But I want.
At least with Moto Hagio, she's done so much manga over the years that, there are other works to pick from. There are other short stories, but it's kind of sad that stuff like A Cruel God Reigns, which is, from my understanding, her most acclaimed work in Japan. I mean, aside from her 70s stuff. And good luck convincing any publisher here to put that out.
Which is it's so frustrating because we get stuff, we do get stuff that's from more modern creators and cough seinen and shonen creators that is allowed to touch on those darker topics. I've been reading Boys Abyss, which is entirely about predatory adults and grooming. But, this is old and it's long and it's a lot of effort for something that's risky, very sensitive material, even if it's sensitively depicted.
Mm-hmm.
I'm angry about the state of the industry.
We have to retroactively put it in a seinen magazine, and then we can bring it over here. Just temporarily put it in a seinen magazine, and then we can be allowed to have it.
My bad.
Yeah, come on. It's a brilliant plan. I'm brilliant. Okay, so yes, y'all can go buy this from Fantagraphics for I didn't actually check the price anymore. I don't
They're
know. It's
50 each, I think.
Oh, they're 50 each now? Oh, goodness.
It might be less. Let me just go ahead and Google that right now.
I was going to say, I think it's usually around 45. You may be able to find them on sale cheaper sometimes.
No, they're 32 a pop.
Oh, nice.
They're 32 a pop on the Crunchyroll store. It's 40 if you go to Fantagraphics site.
Okay. That's not so bad for the amount of manga you get.
Yeah.
It's worth it for the price. It is a steep ask if you're buying it as something whether you're not sure you're going to like it.
Yeah. But if vampires, then good. Okay.
Yeah, do you like gay vampires? You should buy this.
There, we're done.
There, end of podcast.
And
if you don't, I don't understand you.
Bri doesn't understand you. You're off the podcast, but no. Okay, so I wanted to set people's expectations of our familiarity with the series. I will admit that this is the first time I did buy it like last year, over a year ago. And then I kept being like, I need to do that on the podcast. I was so excited to do it. And I just didn't do it. But now we're here and I read it. Yay.
Like you mentioned, it was dense, and it is, but the nice thing about its formatting is it is kind of easy to take in bite-sized chunks.
And I would argue is probably better consumed that way. As for me, I had the first book for years. Of course, I was well aware of that because I had done like panels and essays and whatnot before on the history of Moto Hagio and the Year 24 group. As I noted before, I got it actually last year as the second half last year as a Christmas present. So this podcast actually finally served as an excuse for me to read that second half.
Yay!
Yeah, I was kind of in the same boat where I had bought and read the first volume, and then I got the second volume and had kind of been putting it off. Because the thing about the first volume is it really does, everything centers around that really long chapter where Edgar and Alan meet. And then it's almost like context that goes around it, which is interesting. And it does kind of make it easy to fall off of reading the back half, even though there's some really lovely stuff in there. Yeah.
Oh, we'll get into that more for sure. But so what's everyone's favorite aspect of the series here? Bri, is it gay vampires?
It's gay vampires. You guessed it.
Wow, I'm so good at this game.
Yay! I love that at least the last time I checked it, the Wikipedia described the series as having some homoerotic undercurrents.
Yes.
Some
okay. A little bit.
That's these seem like good friends. These seem like good friends who kiss each other on the mouth.
Alan and Edgar are just friends. Who hug in the woods, for sure.
As for me, aside from, its role in, the bigger scale of shoujo history, I'm just fascinated by its beautiful artwork and uncharacteristically florid in the most literal sense. Like, Moto Hagio's artwork, even as early as something like The Heart of Thomas, is kind of distinct from her contemporaries in how frank and unadorned it is. But here, there are roses popping up all over the place, especially whenever Edgar starts thinking about his sister. And there's just a lot more kind of symbolic, melodramatic imagery that you expect of 1970s shoujo, but not necessarily of Moto Hagio as part of her wider career.
Yeah, it does seem like a bit of a departure for Hagio, but I feel like I said this as a negative before, but I definitely like, again, that it is so dense and so much is going on and it's so beautiful and all of these things. And as you said, Megan, I think you're it's better if you read it slowly. Yeah, I wish I had given myself more time to read it more slowly.
Same. But yeah, there's actually a lot of history to cover here because this is a very pivotal work for Moto Hagio and shoujo manga in general. Because the POE CLAN was Hagio's first serialized work. She had made her debut as a mangaka in 1968, 69. But at this point, she'd only done a few short stories for various Kodansha magazines. But it's in the years leading up to the POE CLAN where she meets two very important people. The first of which was another up-and-coming mangaka by the name of Keiko Takamiya, who was also working with Kodansha at the time, to the point that she was doing stories in a bunch of different magazines at once and falling behind on all of them. And it got to the point where one of her editors literally shut her in a hotel room and is like, you need to finish this. I'm sending over somebody to help you as an assistant. That person was Moto Hagio, and they became friends.
And their relationship is complicated.
Oh, I will get into that. Oh, yes. And it also turns out they had a mutual friend / fan, a high-minded literary type by the name of Norie Masayama. Like, Masayama's very much into, like, older novels, a lot of, like, European stuff, European film, European novels. And she was feeding this stuff to both Hagio and Takamiya because she, wanted them to kind of push their works further and really delve into some, more complex material than shoujo manga was dealing with for the most part at the time. So eventually they both ended up at Shigaka-con, and that's where they met up with an editor who was kind of sympathetic to their work and let them publish this kind of more boundary-pushing stuff. And it was also around this time that Hagio and Takamiya literally move in together into an apartment. It's somewhere in the Tokyo area. I forget precisely where. And this, for a while, gains the nickname of kind of the Oizumi Salon, because there they would gather with Masayama and a whole bunch of other friends within the industry, other up-and-coming mangaka, or they kind of chat and share influences and watch stuff and read stuff together. And this is basically the place where the whole concept of the Year 24 group is born. Now, admittedly, this is not something they would have referred to themselves as. This was a label applied years later by literary critics to ascribe the kind of the kind of artsy-fartsy stuff that this group of mangaka were doing in comparison to more mainstream shoujo artists of the time. But the POE CLAN started coming out in, I think, 72, 73, carried on into 1976. But during this time period, this is, as Vrai noted before, this is when Hagio and Takamiya have a bit of a falling out. And precisely why they have a falling out depends on who you ask. They have both written memoirs in recent years. If you ask Takamiya, it's because she was having issues with jealousy and a kind of an inferiority complex over Hagio and her work. If you ask Hagio, she says it is because people kept accusing her of ripping off Keiko Takamiya, and this was putting a strain on their relationship. It's very complicated. It sounds like it was very messy, and it was very lasting because to this date, the two of them have not really interacted since.
Which is a shame. And honestly, I think still reflected in how you hear people talk about their bodies of work, which is awkward. As to whether Takamiya is the more underappreciated artists or, Hagio being the sort of artistic auteur, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And it also should be noted that the POE CLAN was not initially popular in its serialization. And part of this had to do with the way Hagio released it, because she purposely structured it to kind of sort of start out with these almost unrelated short stories, but kind of eventually ease into the larger story about Edgar and Marybelle and whatnot. But once they started releasing it into volumes, into tankobon, it was huge. Like the first print run for it was 30,000 copies, and it sold out in 3 days. Wow. And keep in mind, the whole concept of amassing chapters into tankobon was still a fairly new concept. Like it was 5 years old, if that. So it was a very early success, not just for shoujo manga, but for kind of putting shoujo manga out on shelves, collecting it physically. And that's also part of the reason why Hagio and her contemporaries' work is better remembered than a lot of their predecessors, because their stuff was collected and printed and reprinted throughout the years. And notably, the POE CLAN has had a surprisingly long life, despite the fact that the manga itself did not run terribly long. Over the years, it spawned a bunch of audio dramas. There was a live action drama. There was a Takarazuka play. And within definitely the last decade, I almost want to say the last 5 years, I don't remember precisely, Hagio actually started doing sequel chapters again.
2016, I want to say.
That sounds about right.
To the POE CLAN?
Yes. Yeah. I think they're published in a Josei magazine.
Wow. Are we going to have to come back later on this podcast to talk about
it? That would depend on somebody picking them up, which, oh God.
It's really hard to find information and summaries of them even right now. I sort of poked around a little before we recorded. The only facts that exist in English language reporting sites or blogs even is, these are getting made.
Pretty much.
this is a thing that exists that you can't access, but they exist somewhere. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we have to reconvene in 20 years.
Oh, God.
Also, I would pop off a fingernail right now to have a good quality subbed version of that POE CLAN Takarazuka play.
Oh my God.
Well, we'll see if anybody takes you up on that when we release this episode.
I'm prepared. I have tools.
You're like, I've been asking for other things too, and nobody accepts my offer.
No one believes me. No one's gotten me that Eroica play yet.
Gosh. Oh my gosh. Hello, it is I, Editor Ashley from Futures Past, here to tell you that, in fact, a month after we had recorded this episode, a month or thereabouts, it was actually reported by Anime News Network that Fantagraphics would in fact be releasing the new POE CLAN manga starting in 2025. So I guess we are all very salty, but we are all very happy to be salty in this case. It is much like that time when discussing Fruits Basket with Jacob and we were asked a question about, will there be a new Fruits Basket anime? And we said no. And then like 3 days later, they were like, yes, there will be. You are fools. And what I'm saying is, we manifest these things into the universe, and so you're welcome, and we will reconvene on this podcast to discuss the new POE CLAN in, I don't know, 5 years. So see you then. And now back to the regularly scheduled episode. So I forgot to make my joke that, like, Megan, you're here because you're the expert on the year 24, and Bry's here because they're an expert on vampires, and I'm just here because I like shoujo manga.
You're just here for the ride.
I'm just here for the ride. That's what's up. Okay, yeah. Well, now so we've gotten a solid place of where this fits into the shoujo manga history timeline. So, Vrai, would you like to tell us about the vampire part?
Yeah, actually, Megan, you mentioned you had a little bit of knowledge about that Hagio herself wasn't super into vampire stories and was more interested in unrelated sci-fi.
Yeah. First of all, the whole concept of vampire fiction didn't really get to Japan until 1930s. I have to imagine maybe on the back of the Universal Dracula, though I don't know if that got into Japan before they went hardcore fascist. But yeah, when you do see vampire fiction pre and post World War II, it's largely within the context of shoujo media, like media aimed at young girls and women. Notably, Hagio was not a fan of those like traditional gothic vampire stories. She found them a bit too aggressive for her taste. But she was a fan of an early shoujo sci-fi vampire story written by Shotaro Ishinomori, because he actually did a lot of shoujo early on in his career, specifically a story called Mist, Rose, and Stars. And it was from there that she got came up with the idea of a story about a boy who craves humanity and yet is rejected from humanity. And that was kind of the core of the POE CLAN, as well as an excuse to draw fancy historical costumes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it so interesting because, I am going to be cribbing liberally from Nina Auerbach's Our Vampires Ourselves, because the Byronic era of vampires is not as much my area of expertise. But the modern vampire as we know it today actually starts with these at the same time that Frankenstein does. It stems from that most famed meeting in Switzerland. And it is a story written by a guy named Polidori, who basically wrote it about how much Lord Byron sucks.
I mean, in fairness,
he did and should be dunked on at all times. But yeah, so the original vampire is this Byron figure who's sort of, a malevolent but charming, figure who swans in, demands all your attention, sucks the life from you, and then abandons you for somebody else. Gosh, I cannot believe that this man was spurned. But again, Byron sucked, and we should always be dunking on him for being also a creep.
You're like, we're dunking on him right now because he deserves it.
Yes. So that's sort of the first what we would know as the modern conception of the vampire. After that, you have a couple of more intermediary ones. There's some Italian ones. There's Varney the Vampire, which was a very popular serialized work in the UK. You have Carmilla, which is a big touchstone that I think is sort of getting tapped into more as a public domain figure. The very first, well, no, that's not true, because there's also Christabel, which was a Samuel Taylor Coleridge poem before that. But Carmilla is often known as the first lesbian vampire. And the thing in common with all of these early pre-Dracula vampires is that they tend to be these sort of lonely aristocratic figures, right, who are intimating the protagonist into this deep bond and promise of an oath, right? So it's about these crossing of boundaries, of class boundaries, and then, you know, they might turn out to be evil or malcontent, but it's the promise of this deep, powerful, homoerotic friendship and understanding with another soul that the vampire sort of personifies in this era. And then, you know, they're Byronic in the traditional meaning of that word. They come from that era of literature. And then you have Bram Stoker, and he was like, what if we made a vampire story about how we should all be deeply afraid of immigrants?
Oh.
Yeah, Dracula's description in the novel is extremely tied to race science beliefs about what the traditional and very anti-Semitic looks of what like a hereditarily evil person looked like. And don't give it, there is still a great deal of homoeroticism in Dracula, but I think people associate it with sexuality because it is about this fear of the sexual other, of the foreign man who's going to come into good Christian British homes and steal your women. Dracula is a very interesting, very problematic work. And so, yeah, the connection that is going to be most obvious for any English-speaking vampire fan is Anne Rice, because Interview with the Vampire is published in 1976. The same time that the POE clan is running in Japan. I've seen the occasional person wonder, was Anne Rice somehow, had she seen Hagio's work? I am 99% sure. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But, I mean, right, she was not that sort of woman. Look, there's a lot of exoticizing of the other in her work, and we just don't have time to unpack it now. We simply do not have time. But Anne is responsible for the creation of the horror of the child vampire in Western conceptions. You know, she wrote that book out after she lost her 5-year-old daughter to leukemia. I'm sorry, folks at home, if I remember that. She lost her 5-year-old daughter to a terminal illness, and in that, her like incredible grief and depression, she invents this idea of, you know, a child who lives forever, and her mind grows, but her body never does. And so that sort of creates this link between these two works. There actually is a manga adaptation of Interview with the Vampire that gets made based on the book, but when the movie came out in 1994. We have it. It's very pretty. I like it a lot, but I'm not entirely clear when exactly Interview the novel gets translated into Japanese. I know that it does because there is sort of a small contingent of Anne Rice fans in Japan, and there are some very lovely manga-style covers for the novels that have been made, but it's definitely a smaller contingent over there, and it exists in that sort of shadow of everyone there would know the POE clan better as this story of these sort of vampires who are young and frozen in time. And also Alan and Edgar do have some similarities to Louis and Lestat, Alan in particular, as this sort of sad, angry child of privilege who's actually lonely and is swept away by this, you know, beautiful, fair-haired, mysterious waif. Very on point. Although, but despite this child vampirism element, honestly, what POE clan to me has more in common with is a wonderful novel that is actually in conversation with Anne Rice, but a much more positive take on it, because Interview is a deeply taken on its own without the sequels that were made, you know, starting 9 years later. It's a deeply nihilistic novel about breaking cycles of abuse, even if it means you'll ultimately be alone finding the power to do that, and also just, soul-crushing catatonic depression and grief. It's real good.
Huh.
But POE CLAN, especially the ending, which I'm sure we'll talk about, reminds me a lot more of Jewel Gomez's The Gilda Stories, which is a series of vignettes about this young woman who it starts off with her and her mother running away from enslavement, and she is taken into the home of this indigenous woman who is a vampire and who raises her and eventually turns her. And then her sort of travels to various parts of the country and the communities that she finds at 4 different points in history. And it's very much about immortality, not as a lonely, scarring experience, but as this opportunity to bring comfort and succor to like women and marginalized groups in these pockets and sort of the dry together that you find. It's a really beautiful novel that I think more people should read, and I love it a lot. And of course, Let the Right One In is definitely applicable too here, although that's a lot more vicious than the POE CLAN is.
The other thing I should note, although admittedly I'm not as familiar with vampire fiction and thus the conventions of vampire fiction as Vrai, what does intrigue me is that, of course, every vampire story has to, do the our vampires are different because whatever. And in this case, there is actually a lot different. First of all, in the terminology itself, they're not vampires in the POE CLAN. They are vampirnellas. And this is entirely because Hagio just thought the term sounded cool and vaguely Italian.
I mean, great.
I mean, it does sound beautiful and exotic, but also it's not, the way the vampires feed is not very violent onto itself. They don't bite people. They don't have fangs for the most part. They don't even really drink blood for the most part. They kind of just put their fingers on people, particularly their necks, and just kind of suck the energy out of them. And this also plays a lot into the rose imagery. Like when they can't get blood or human energy or whatever you want to call it, they eat roses. Like they drink rose soup or like essence of roses. And there is a long history of manga, shoujo manga in particular, using roses and flowers in general as a visual metaphor for blood. But overall, I get the feeling that a lot of the actual vampiric imagery was kind of neutered during its creation, by editorial consent. Like, we need to tone this down. We need to make this less violent because this is technically still for girls. Also, we can't get away with making it that homoerotic yet because, this is the early 70s. Boys love as a genre is truly nascent. At this point, it's literally just a handful of short stories that people like Hagio and Takamiya are making. This hasn't quite become normalized within shoujo manga yet, so we can't get too crazy about it. We still have to be kind of subliminal about it.
Yeah, just
barely.
a nice caress to the neck instead of sucking his blood from there.
Yeah. Again, they do kiss on the mouth.
They do kiss on the mouth. You're right. Oh my goodness. Well, this is all very educational to me because literally my understanding of vampires is, as Bri said, like initially they're like this aristocratic, scared thing. Dracula comes along and redoes all vampires. Then there's Anne Rice, and then Twilight is off on its own doing a weird thing.
I have a lot of thoughts about Twilight that are not for here.
Yeah, that are not relevant here. Thank God.
Yeah, not relevant in the like. Those vampires are also weird, but not in the same way that Moto Hagio's vampires are.
I will
weird.
say, I do got to shout out the Tumblr Twilight community for finally coming around to this series is extremely stupid and affectionate.
They're embracing the campiness now.
Okay, and I love that for them.
we love to see progress on the Twilight front. Yes, forever and always. Okay. Well, so now that we've done like establishing, the importance in both histories, I think we can get a little more into the specifics of the series, talk about characters more in depth. So I guess we can start with Marybelle because, spoiler, she dies. Like, I don't know.
I mean, we are in the spoilerific part, so,
Yeah, we are in the spoiler part now. So she dies. And like by the second volume, she's not really there except we jump all around in time. So, it's all confusing, but whatever.
Yeah.
So,
she's dead she's dead by like vampire standards dead.
Yeah.
But she's very much a pivot point around which a lot of the story and a lot of Edgar's character arc revolves.
Yeah, I definitely ended up pleasantly surprised by how much she gets a lot more characterization than a Lost Lenore type usually does.
I was always just confused that, like, well, Vrai, you mentioned that she was always sickly, and I was like, was she when she was a human? Was she sickly? And is that why she's always like anemic? And
no, they mentioned later on that she takes badly to Edgar's blood for whatever reason.
Oh, see, I knew there
so
was
like
some
once she's a
real-
vampire, it like implicitly, it's not good for her. Something metaphors.
Right. Something. Incest is bad, kids. Incest is bad.
Incest is bad.
There, we did it. Analysis done. All right.
I don't know. I was a little frustrated by Marybelle because more often than not, she's not really a character in her own right so much as she is a plot device. Like, there are some exceptions. There are some later chapters before she gets vampirized and even after she gets vampirized where she gets to be a more proactive character and we get to get a better sense of her as a person. But for the most part, we're viewing her through Edgar's eyes. And in Edgar's eyes, she is a pure melodramatic ingenue. You know, she is just this beautiful waif drifting through his mind, covered in roses.
Yeah, you definitely have the sense that like Hagio got a better grasp of her as she was going along, because I think it's Marybelle and the Silver Rose that's the story about what she was doing before Edgar came and turned her. I quite liked that story. I quite liked her as a character in it.
Yes, and there's another one where she has to save Edgar when he gets amnesia.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up, was that I was like, I remember distinctly where I felt like there was a moment of badassery, or like the badassery was hiding under there, was when Edgar got amnesia and she was like, oh no, I have to help Edgar. This is ridiculous.
She's cunning in that story.
But then, you know, she literally dies because someone throws a cross at her. Not even like on her body, just like on the floor. And they like pick it up and she's like, yeah, poof.
No. She got shot.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And also, there's a good portion of this story where she's literally a little girl.
Oh yeah, listen, there's a lot of stretches of the story where she's infantilized, or she's a figure for Edgar and Alan to be sad about, a thing that drives a wedge between them. I just, look, I'm the bar
is in the
is
ground.
on the ground.
Right? Like it's buried under the ground. It's good that it didn't dig it up too much, and we walked over it. Nice. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. She's not my favorite character because of all the, I have like this image. My lingering impression of her was that she was always just like, I am fainting everywhere, Yes. Like, rose essence isn't helpful because just the blood in my veins is no good, And I'm like, all right. And I think that we can't really talk about Marybelle without talking about Edgar, because that's his whole, there's no consistent Edgar through the centuries, but
I don't know, there is and there isn't, because there's a lot of made about, like, even before he's a vampire, like, he's very much, because of his life experiences, he comes off as much older than his age, real or appearance. And there's also a lot of made about how he has this very frank, steely, almost hawkish gaze, and admittedly that is one of the things Hagio draws the best, and she only gets better at it over time. Just, he has this like piercing gaze that's always staring like right out at you, the reader.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd also never guess that, underneath that kind of steely, almost at times surly exterior, he's so goddamn emo. Like, again, most of the time his inner monologue is just nothing about woe for my poor sister and how lonely he is. And that's part of what ultimately drives him to find a companion, and that's how he ends up with Alan.
As an emo, I take offense to this.
You don't want Edgar to be associated with your clan?
He definitely is emo, but like, listen, it's just, yeah. Honestly, I'd feel better about the I am sad about my lost mortality trope writing here if it got a chance to have a little more grounding. People bag on Louis from Interview a lot, but he's actually just, oh, this is catatonic depression from all the things, from your abusive marriage and your dead kid. Okay. Like, I feel like Edgar has reasons for why he's sad, but like you kind of alluded to, because the story jumps around so much, Edgar's characterization does too. So it doesn't feel consistent. It can feel like Marybelle's relative competence to the plot. Edgar's level of angst is what it needs to be.
Yeah, that's how I felt, and I actually really hated that amnesia chapter because of, like, I was like, no, not an amnesia chapter, not just like, let's completely erase Edgar's character for a hot minute.
Look, it's a welcome change of pace at that point.
You always thought so? I don't know.
I really did, like, because Edgar is very, regardless of how old his companions are, whether he's with the Portnells, whether he's with Alan, whether he's with Marybelle or not, he's very much like the oldest and thus kind of the one in charge, or at least he tries to take charge of the situation. So having a situation where he's the one in danger, he's the one who is kind of helpless, and thus it's up to his sister to help him without, spoiling the whole vampire thing. It was a nice twist, despite the cliche of literally bonked on the head, got amnesia.
Yeah, I was just like, I don't know if I can take this.
I did find it very cute that they included Hagio's author notes, where she just pulls an explanation for why he has a pulse directly out of her butt. I love that for her.
Oh, yeah. I love those author notes where she just talks about things, or like questions people asked her, like, hey, if a vampire's wearing new underpants, do the underpants dissolve with everything else too?
That was the only chapter in which it happened, but the two of them were amazing author notes. I was like, this is, if I was going to make a compilation of best author notes, like, they definitely got to be included. They're so funny. Oh my gosh. My highlight of everything is the author notes in the chapter that I like the least. That's what's up. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, yeah. So we mentioned Alan already too. And like, I had trouble like understanding, I think, why Edgar wanted to like turn this guy so bad.
See, I get it.
No, like, I get it.
Oh, you get it? Okay.
I mean, Vrai, you already covered like his backstory pretty extensively. Like, he is the poor little rich boy, and he's very impulsive and commanding in his own way. But Edgar is the first person who doesn't, cower, or doesn't just defer to him because he's rich. So Alan kind of respects that. But also, there are certain parallels in the way both boys lose their families and the similarity to their loneliness. So it's not surprising that Edgar kind of reaches out to him and ultimately vampirizes them, even if it ultimately turns into a very weird, codependent sort of love-hate relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think early on it is too that like Alan resists him. It's very much the romance novel trope is that you have turned me down, and so but beyond that, I think it's that it's Alan spends their entire relationship terrified that he's just a stand-in for Marybelle, but I think what Edgar liked about him was that it feels like he can take care of himself, but he'll still come back to me. And I'm sad. I'm sad about these sad boys.
Yeah, I guess once it becomes that Alan is turned and like is overtly a stand-in for Marybelle, but also like overtly, a love interest and all of these things, I was like, okay, I guess I like kind of understand. But from the beginning, like when he was doing it, I was like, isn't he just annoying? You want this guy to live forever with you? That's what you want to do? Are you sure? Like, are you sure?
Fairness, Alan's situation kind of sucks. Like, everybody in his family defers to him. Basically, they're just waiting for him to get old enough to marry his cousin so they can keep the wealth in the family.
Yeah, they're pacifying him, and like he clearly has a sense of that. And so he is both being an absolute brat and taking advantage of that the way, a adolescent kid would, and also to put on my Freud hat, just desperately wants somebody to tell him no.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, Edgar said, no, you're not going to die. You're going to live forever with me. And we're going to gallivant through the forest like little fairies, as Vrai said, and do great things. I did love the chapter where
we will raise a 5-year-old.
Yes, like at that point, at that point, it was so hard not to think of Interview with the Vampire. It's like, oh, for God's sakes, they are literally raising a child together. Admittedly, she's not vampirized. Her name is Liddy. She's just a little orphan noble girl they find, and they raise her for a while until they hear about her grandma looking for her, and then they just kind of drop her off, and then Liddy grows up. It's like, but I never forgot my foster fathers living in the forest.
Yes, they took her to the green world and then returned her to the world of mortals, and it was as though a day had passed. But sorry, this is a fae story.
This is a fae story mixed with vampires.
I do. You mentioned the vampirnella thing an age ago, but it did remind me on the subject of which stories use the loanword vampire versus which ones go with the sort of more slightly culturally distinct Kyuketsuki. I did love realizing how much POE CLAN goes through to Vampire Princess Mew specifically. That really delighted me.
Oh, I didn't even think about that, especially since the last time I was on here, I was talking about Namurumi Kakenoichi, although we were talking about a different work.
Yeah.
But right, like especially the OVA that they made, which is superior to the TV show. But
yeah, I also didn't think about the fact. Oh yeah, Japanese doesn't necessarily has its own word for vampire in addition to however you render vampire in katakana.
I have derailed, but I also wanted to. I'm surprised how not annoyed at the ending I am, because the rules of anything gay in this era, regardless it seems like of your country of origin, is you must have a tragic ending because that's the only way you can get it through.
Bury your gays.
You gotta die.
Bury them gays. But I thought she really threaded being vague about it here. It's both like, oh, we didn't find the body, who can say? But it's also a conclusive emotional resonance, right? Because it proves to Alan that Edgar picked him, which, I don't know, gives me the feels.
Yeah. No, I liked the ending despite you gotta kill your gays and everything.
See, I think I overlooked this, but mostly because I read this in kind of one long stretch, and by the back half of that second omnibus, I was getting a little exhausted with things.
Because it's so dense, yes.
Also, it starts kind of going away from the direct telling of the story of Edgar and Marybelle and Alan and the descendants of Edgar's extended family, and it gets go back to the one shots where random people are encountering them, and it starts to feel a little off topic. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I can see that.
It goes a little far afield, and you can tell that a lot of those later chapters are all published in different magazines type of thing.
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess I always was I felt this gonna be weird to say. It's I feel good about Edgar finally getting to die. He needs to rest in peace. He saw a lot of people. He tried to prevent the deaths of so many people, and it didn't work.
And sometimes he accidentally killed people, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, sometimes he killed some people directly. And so I'm just that guy, he needs to lie down forever, yes.
At least until the sequel chapters. Although it's not even clear whether it picks up where the series ended or it's just another story in the middle of things.
Yeah, does it just go back to World War II Germany,
Where we mention the Nazis in passing for one panel and then do not speak of it.
A single panel of a swastika. We just go over that.
Fair. Don't even step on that landmine.
Just keep going. Just keep going. Exactly.
People were sad for a reason.
Yes. Reasons. Things happened, and we got through it. So I would assume that it's probably just more of the same, but that's totally an assumption.
Yeah, I also assumed they were more just stories in between before the ending, but again, could not find any information to confer this fact. And I'm kind of torn, right? Because part of me is and they didn't die in the explosion magically somehow, even though
we saw the parachutes.
Definitely died. But at the same time, if that were officially canonized, other than being kind of vaguely hopeful, whatever happened, they're happy, it would feel a little cheap, I think.
Yeah. But we've done all this talking about the POE clan, but we've not actually discussed yet the actual literal POE clan, like all the older people that take care of them. In particular, there's old Hannah, who's basically the first person who takes in Edgar and Marybelle when they're children, is like their nanny. And then their actual parents, the Portnells, and I forget their first names. He's like a baron of some sort. She's also nobility. His wife is also nobility.
Her name is like Sheila or something, right?
Sheila or something.
It was Sheila. I'm fairly certain.
I don't remember his name.
But anyway, this is the case with a lot of the older members of the extended POE clan, that they're all very kindly authority figures who do try their best to be good guardians to Edgar and Marybelle and try to keep them away from the vampire stuff before they're old enough to actually make those choices. They kind of fail due to circumstances beyond their control, but, you do what you gotta do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
a lot of the side characters in this are very... I tended to I felt like the girls in the one-off side stories, Liddy was cute. Esther was a fun, spunky girl, even if I found my teeth grating at the degree to which she served a plot purpose.
I rather liked, I think her name's Linda from Marybelle and the Silver Rose, the amnesia story. The girl that Marybelle, basically arranges to be her companion so she can insert herself into the story.
Yeah. I liked her.
Yeah, she's very outspoken and cute.
Yeah, she's spunky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of that, also, aside from the adoptive family of the Portnells, there's also Edgar and Marybelle's actual, half bio family, because it turns out they're the bastard children of the Evans clan, specifically, I forget their title. I think he's a lord. And so they encounter a lot of their descendants along the way, most prominently Oswald.
Yes, Oswald.
Who's got that Ikeda hair.
Oh, yeah. He's this dissolute pretty boy, a playboy.
Who I must credit him, immediately stops pursuing Marybelle when he realizes they're blood related.
Yeah, he was like, nope.
Props. And you know what? Other kudos to the short story where they Edgar and Alan go to find a guy who supposedly has a map to where the village of the POE clan is, which we never solved that mystery. I guess we forgot about it. Moving on. But he's been murdered in a terrible accident, a terrible passion. And then at the end of the story, we find out that the lovely young lady who thought of him as her kindly uncle, he'd been raising her since childhood to eventually make her a vampire and marry her. So that really this was a happy ending after all.
Yeah, this is good.
Hooray!
Hooray.
I mean, it's very gothic in the most classical sense, but...
Yeah, I mean... Really, all this story, all this series is missing is a girl buying a house.
Or inheriting one.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of feuding brothers. That seems to be a common thing with the Evans clan, between the story where Oswald and his half-brother, Eustace, feud over Marybelle, basically over who gets to marry her, because Eustace is even prettier than Oswald. He's just this diaphanous blonde with long hair and these dark, glittery eyes.
And 6 layers of fake lashes.
Oh my god. And then later on, in a different generation, there's Henry and his younger brother Roger. Henry is the one who takes in Edgar when he's an amnesiac, because he was instructed by his grandfather, who was in fact Oswald, who wrote about his experiences with the Portnells in a diary, and in his will basically said, if you ever encounter some spooky kids named Edgar and Marybelle, you're going to give them all our money. And Henry's like, yes, sir, I have to obey this. And his brother's watching no, you don't. That's my money.
A reasonable response from Roger, but he's bad, so we can't like him.
But he screws it up and feels bad about it, so it's fine, I guess.
Yeah, after a while, it all starts to blend together as you go through the generations, because you go through a couple of 100 years worth of Evans and their descendants.
I thought you were going to be like, you go through a couple hundred Henry and Rogers, and I was like, you go through 3. 3 different
It
Henrys
is interesting, the series, to have the series end basically contemporarily to when it was being published.
Yeah.
I always think that's a cute move with vampire stories.
Yeah. I also was like, okay, well, I guess that was the logical conclusion that had to happen here.
Right, unless you want to take a stab at the far, usually cyberpunk future.
Yeah. It would get real weird real fast.
Yeah, because the way the story's structured is there's almost sort of a cyclical quality to it, where you start out in ye old past with these kind of short stories about these unrelated people encountering Edgar and Marybelle, and then eventually you get into kind of the heart of the story, where you get into their backstory and how they meet Alan and everything that goes down from there. And then eventually you come back to the shorter stories about these unrelated people and these distant relatives who encounter Edgar and Alan, and they kind of pop in and out of the stories as they please.
You know, I will say the one thing that kind of dissatisfies me about the ending, which I think is really good on a character level, but I was really struck during the boarding school chapter in particular, because who doesn't love a gay boarding school angst story, is how much Edgar and Alan can kind of stand in as these like queer outsiders out of time, right? Because like they meet so many young queer coded people in despair, and they're sort of these ethereal, fey, untouchable creatures who've managed to escape preordained death. And I thought it was sort of some powerful imagery, especially with all the sort of diaphanous flower and young god imagery around them.
It should also be noted that boarding schools are, who also really likes, stories of gay kids in German boarding schools? Moto Hagio, because that particular story, The Bird's Nest, feels so much like just a rough draft for the heart of Thomas.
Oh,
and
very much.
And I gotta say, I gotta be real, it's not as good as the heart of Thomas.
No.
It's really confusing at points.
Yes.
Like, she kind of figures out the point eventually with what's his name, Matthias, the sensitive kid who hangs out in the greenhouse with his roses, who's sad about the boy he was very clearly in love with, who drowned, who's also being abused by his elders, just like the kids in Heart of Thomas.
Yeah.
I mean, wasn't she pretty straightforward about the fact that it was basically a dry run for what she would do for Heart of Thomas?
I don't know if I've seen an interview where she acknowledged that much, but I mean, if you're familiar with the Heart of Thomas, if you've read the Heart of Thomas, you can't not see it.
Well, and I think Heart of Thomas also, thinking about it, captures that sort of tragic but hopeful ending that POE CLAN has, which is, I don't know, I really like Hagio's writing style. I do.
Yeah. Also, we noted the different time period. Heart of Thomas takes place earlier. It takes place pre-World War II, whereas The Bird's Nest takes place in, the 50s and, Cold War West Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something there with like the story of the wall, and I found that sort of interesting, but that story is just packed with so many elements of stuff she was clearly eager to play around with that it does end up a bit confused. But I feel like it has a lot of really strong elements to it too.
Yeah, like when it's focused on one thing at a time, it's like, okay, I'm here. I'm so here. And then it will be like, and now we're jumping to 5 different things. And I'm like, who's doing what now? What happened?
Who are all these boys?
What happened? Yes. Oh my gosh, I know I'm not following the plot. And then we'd go back and I'd be like, okay, I'm like grounded.
Yeah, that is kind of the downside of her shall we call it sparing use of background drawing, is sometimes, like we pointed out multiple times, the blocking can be confusing. Like, I definitely did have to reread those couple pages twice to realize that Marybelle was shot with a silver bullet and did not just disappear into dust because she saw a crucifix.
Although it's very funny if she just disappeared into dust because she saw a crucifix.
I mean, who cannot relate?
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Bri, how can you hate the last chapter when it includes the funniest part of the story, which is Edgar being kidnapped in a car, or like put himself in a car trunk, being like tailing people. And then he's like, oh.
Hate is a strong word. Hate is a strong word. There is a lot that I like about that last chapter.
Yeah.
And he wears a little hat with dealy boppers, and it's relevant to the plot.
It's just so funny. He just puts it on so seriously and is like, it's my hat now. I'm like, what's happening? I just thought it was so funny. It made me chuckle so much. And then, he dies. Like, whatever, that's fine.
Edgar's a very cute character in places. I really like I wish that his characterization was more consistent, but I feel like I can, in my mind, draw a consistent arc for him, right? Where he is he fancies himself this sort of trickster figure who has these very deep vulnerabilities. And has also taken upon him this extremely needy brat who knows exactly how to needle him.
Yes.
He does get a little nicer over time. Like, one of my favorite of the later stories is the one where he befriends the spinster lady who, admittedly at first, you're not quite sure what's going on with her, because she's gathering all these boys at her house to sing. But, it sounds sketch. But it turns out nice in the end, because it turns out she's just lonely over her first love, and she and Edgar kind of bond over the concept of loneliness, and he helps kind of steer her towards, finding somebody new, so she doesn't have to, keep channeling all these weird feelings into gathering all these young boys around her.
It doesn't work out. I do like that chapter, though. It sure makes me wish that it had been about the dichotomy of Edgar not turning out that, but it's fine. It's fine. The ending still ends like that, even if they blow up. It's fine.
Yeah, and the problem is, I don't know if it's immediate. I don't remember if it's immediately followed, but it's followed not too long thereafter. The chapter where literally a bunch of descendants of the Evans family get together, kind of collate all their notes and records and whatnot, and they're basically figuring out, hey, there are these vampire kids who keep following our family around, and Edgar and Alan are basically in the background, like, oh, we can't let this happen, and they literally burn down the house and they kill a 14-year-old.
Yeah, that didn't feel good.
It was an accident.
It was an accident, but
they did very much do that, yes.
It very much ends on kind of a sour note, and I also feel like that's kind of the last chapter where I feel like that's really the point where the series should have ended, and it just kind of peters. It kind of extends out from there, but you kind of get the idea that Hagio was kind of running out of gas for the series by 76.
Yeah, like, I definitely feel like where it ended, it had to end, because it felt like Edgar was like, I'm at peak Edgar, like, he's learned everything, has this poise, like, I felt like I finally understood him. He had grown into this full thing, and he was just like, this is what we do now. I can wear silly hats and you have to respect me, like that felt like where we had ended up. And and then they were figuring out the secret. They were all like, oh no, they're real vampire children, right? So it felt like it was like, okay, you gotta hard end it here, because like there's nowhere else for Edgar to go. Like, we can keep jumping around in time, fine, but like, do you really want to? Do you?
Apparently people
Apparently
did.
she does, because
yes,
we need money.
If Ikeda can do it, so can she, I guess.
Yeah, we can't make new IPs now. You just gotta crib on the old IPs. Come on.
Or maybe, it took her 50 years to come up with some new ideas.
Yeah.
Like, she got busy, okay?
Now I really want to know if she's like, they didn't blow up, though. Like, that's a really pressing question for me now. Like, do they get cell phones?
It really is.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, listen, what is the modern POE clan but Fairy Ranmaru? A good show. More people should watch.
And Pagan.
Admittedly, the POE clan is a little lacking in, man muscle than Fairy Ranmaru.
Which, well, yeah, to be fair, they are wayfish 14-year-olds.
Yeah. Very wayfish.
As was the style at the time.
Yeah. Which again, it's a beautiful aesthetic that I like very much. I feel like I'm dunking on this series that I like very much a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, look, sometimes that's part of loving a thing, is being aware of its faults, but still loving it anyway.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I mean, I've had plenty of criticisms, but I really feel like, as strong as Hagio's art was at the beginning, she really just grows into it over time, and a lot of the stories from the second omnibus are just absolutely stunning, and she really nails like Edgar's aesthetic, like just the way she draws him with those hawkish looks, and the particular way she draws his curly hair. I don't know, there's just something really striking about it. Also the color artwork. Oh my god, the color artwork.
Although I know it's just whatever the colorist of the time feels is good for the piece, but I definitely did not picture him as a brunette
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to swear he's usually drawn as a blonde, but I
He
don't
is,
know.
and some of the color art is of him as a blonde, and some of them are brunette.
yeah.
Yes, I'm suffering.
How will we ever know what's canonical now? We can't. No. I feel like in the text they say that he is blonde at some point, but maybe I am just making stuff up in my mind. No. So I kind of do want to talk a little bit more about the actual POE clan members, and then we can wrap things up here. But I guess I liked the chapters also where Hannah took them in and they lived, not knowing that they were among vampires, and you get to see the vampires be like good people or whatever, like they're not overtly evil creatures trying to do terrible things all the time.
I mean, that is the whole thing with the story. Like the vampirnellas are not inherently evil onto themselves. Yeah. They're just trying to survive in this world.
They're just trying to be like, oh, humans hate us and they want to kill us all the time. So sometimes we have to kill them too. Yeah.
But even then, they try to be ethical about it. Like, the Portnails are very clear. Like, we're not turning these kids until they hit the age of majority. At least that was the plan. And even then, like, he waited for his wife to turn 25, so she could operate as an adult.
Yeah. At first, I was confused whether she knew she was going to become a vampire by choosing to marry him, but then the way that she acted after, I was like, all right, no, she had to know.
No, she was just like down for this.
Yeah,
I love Sheila. Honestly, she's really underutilized in the story, but she is a woman who knows what she wants, and was also really, really trying to hook up with that girl. Like that whole chapter has peak. We saw you across the bar, and we like your vibes.
Oh my god, it's funny because it's true.
Yeah,
I
wanted that for her. They went on a lovely shopping trip. It was cute, and then the things occurred.
Yeah. I see. What I didn't like about that chapter was like I felt like in all the other chapters we got the Portnells. They were like, okay, we're our own little clan. They seem nice enough, like a little grouchy because Edgar's, a little brat usually, and all these things. Like they do have to take the burden on of like caring for these children. But again, I just feel like that boarding school chapter was like, not only is there all of this stuff with like Alan and all of these boys and all this stuff going on, like trying to follow who's who, what's what, and then it was also like, oh, well, now their parents seem like really mean. Like like their dad was just like, no, you're wrong. You shouldn't do this. Stop it.
That's coming from Edgar's perspective, and he always kind of chafed at the Portnell's attempt to parent him.
I guess it came on real strong in that chapter.
It does. I don't think it helps that maybe because she's disinterested in vampire qua vampire, the story is a little bit vague on how its turning rules work. Like, do you have to drain somebody to death and then they die and wake up a vampire, or you bite them, they're a vampire. They're a vampirnella now. They
know that you have to consume the blood of a stronger vampire to be turned. And as we've known before with Marybelle, that can go poorly. Mm-hmm. It's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and it's a little muddled by the fact that, all the human characters are always talking about superstitions of if you get bitten, you will transform. But I think the story, it can muddle the storytelling a little bit in places.
Yeah.
Not a big deal, but.
No, for sure. It's like, eventually I feel like I was like, okay, yeah, they have to suck out enough blood. It doesn't always work. They do die and then come back. If you bite them, they don't necessarily turn into a vampire. Like, it seems like biting actually doesn't do it, was what I got out of this in the end.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think that's what's so funny about Hagio's like author's notes too, is just that she's so clearly uninterested in thinking through all of the logic of whatever has been told so far.
They're spooky and elegant and they live forever.
Yeah, like
look what I'm doing this week.
Yes.
And truly, I respect the audacity of it. I have affection for that.
Yeah. I feel like that applies to more things than what she talked about in those author's notes, right? Like, I think she's just like, like, whatever, you guys. Like, we're running on vibes, okay? Vibes.
Yes. That is a perfect summary of the POE clan. It is very much operating on vibes, and either you're into those vibes and you're with it, or you're not.
Either you like rose essence or you don't. Like that's what's up. Get high on the rose essence or hop off. Like that's
gay vampires, which proves she's not a coward. I have no time for people who write heterosexual vampire stories. She understood the important part of the lore, is what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, you're right. She was like, but to be clear, they're gay. They kissing and hugging in the woods, okay?
Kissing, they hugging, they parenting.
Lydia had 2 dads, okay? She had 2 dads.
She did.
She did. And shockingly, she was not traumatized for life.
Yeah, she was good with this. She was like, that was awesome time. And now
those
I'm good again.
14-year-olds were good dads.
Yes.
Surprising everyone.
I love that for her and for them, truly. Like, I just thought that chapter was very heartwarming. Okay. Is there anything else we would like to end on, or is they gay? Like,
I really think that's the most important takeaway.
The most important takeaway is they gay.
They gay, it's pretty, it's messy, but it's fascinating, and it's historically important. And that's why you should read the POE CLAN.
Everybody go read the POE CLAN.
Buy it, get it from your local library. Support old shoujo. It needs all the support it can get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I gotta always be getting all the shoujos. We need to fight with our dollars, which is sad, but true.
I would like to have Dear Brother in English, please. Dear
God, Annie Old Yuri, how is this not happening?
Where is my Sword of Paros?
We're all gonna write down, I should go back and write down everything that's been mentioned in an episode and like, just write everything in all the surveys, you know.
We gotta survey strong.
Survey strong. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening to Shojo and Tell. I can't even say the name of my podcast anymore. All right. Comments, questions, constructive criticism, concerns, need to gush about how much you love Moto Hagio and you need more Moto Hagio? Email shojoandtell@gmail.com or leave a comment on the episode's YouTube page. We're at Shojo and Tell on, oh gosh, I didn't change this yet, on Blue Sky, Tumblr, and Instagram. And I guess there's still a Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, account out there.
If you want, I guess.
I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. I just hope it burns down soon. Anyway, Vrai, where can people find you and your work on the internet?
Well, you can find a lot of the work I've been doing lately by going to animefeminist.com or supporting the work that my fine colleagues do at patreon.com/animefeminist. Or you can find the collections of my writings are at vraikaiser.com. And like I said, I am on the social media on Blue Sky at WriterVry. Yay. I also have a podcast, but it's currently on hiatus. We're figuring out how to go forward with that.
All the podcasts are currently on hiatus. That's what I've learned. And Megan, where can people find you and your work on the internet?
You can find my reviews at mangatestdrive.blogspot.com. I also have a sister blog, Renaissance Josei, where I do longer reviews and essays and whatnot sometimes. That's renaissancejosei.blogspot.com. I am also on Patreon at Megan D. Like I said, I'm an occasional anime feminist contributor. You can find some of my writings and podcast appearances there. I am also on Blue Sky at Brainchild129. You can also find the account for my blogs, which is at Manga Test Drive, also on Blue Sky. Technically, I'm still on Twitter as well at Brainchild129, but I don't post much there anymore. It's not good anymore.
It's no good anymore. We all have to go somewhere else now. Are you excited every time you see a new episode from us? If so, please consider leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts or shouting about it on Blue Sky or whatever, you know? This will help the podcast reach more hearts, or at least ears. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next time for I don't know this time. I wanted to do 5 backlog episodes and then go, but then when I was thinking of what I wanted to do, I was like, this doesn't add up. I was like, maybe Oku, the Inner Chambers, but also maybe something shorter first.
But it's 20 volumes and there's so much to unpack.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, this doesn't feel like the one to go for this intro, but I want to do it eventually. But, it'll be a surprise. Find out next time. Until then, bye.
Bye.
Bye.